Good evening. Do you hear me?
Yes, teacher.
Great.
Perfectly.
Okay, good. So I hope the sound is better now. Okay. So we are going to start. I was asking you about the task that you have this week, which is in groups. One student emailed me on Monday, if I'm not wrong, and told me that their information was not available. So if that happens again, please email me as soon as you see it, because I published the task on Sunday. I mean, I enabled the tasks for all of you on Sunday. And I didn't realize you couldn't see it. It was a problem in the setting, a mistake that I made. And just because of one of your classmates emailed me, I could find out that there was a problem in the setting. So I would like to know, how are you doing with that task? Is everything clear what you have to do for this week?
Yes, teacher. I already opened the both links and both of them are okay. I didn't read yet, but it's okay.
Okay, good. So remember that is a group task.
Sí.
And if you have any questions, you can ask, okay? Well, we are going to review today what you studied the previous week, and we are also going to finish a session that we had last time about identities. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Last time we were discussing these questions because you watched the video.
Creo que
You watched a video about
no, estaba avisarles con Patricia.
You watched a video about a teacher who was wondering the reason why students didn't participate in class, since all of them had a good English level, because all of them had either the father or the mother was native, so all of them spoke English since they were children. So that teacher was wondering the reason why his students didn't participate, and we watched the video. It was 7 minutes, and we discussed about the activities that the teacher promoted, and student reactions and students' participation. So what do you remember that we talked about the identity that the teacher was reflecting, and the identity that some of you were constructing about the teacher? And those two things, I think, was what we just discussed last time. So what do you remember about that?
I remember that we spoke about that the teacher wasn't as good to give the class, no? He a speaker of English, but he was not a teacher, so he didn't deal well with the class, and because of that, the class wasn't interested in the subject and in participate also.
Okay, thank you, Noemi. Yes, most of you constructed the identity of that teacher as a person who didn't plan his class, and a person who proposed boring activities. That was the way you perceived the lesson, and that you were constructing the identity of that teacher.
Teacher, I would like to give my opinion about the video.
Sure, Sarah.
I think that the teacher always talks. The students don't have the opportunity to talk about the exercises. I think because the exercises are not dynamic, and additionally, the teacher doesn't use correct and appropriate tools to innovate in his class. He uses to can a question, maybe yes or no question, when he asks what's the meaning sign up, or an information question. Those kind of questions are not too interesting to college student attention. I mean, those questions don't let or don't allow the students analyze or give creative examples according to the context in order to get a better understanding about the new vocabulary or the topic about fabrics. And teacher, there was not a correct communication among them. I consider that the teacher doesn't offer maybe the opportunity to develop their talents as a readers and writers. According to their readings, it's necessary to take in account and describe planning, orthography, grammar, prescript and descript material. And I consider that teachers should know what is the mother tongue of your students, what was the first language that they learned before or they are native on English, what language they speak, because maybe they know another kinds of language, how often they speak or practice and identify set varieties in class. For example, in this video may have students from different part of the world, maybe such as India or French, I don't know. Teacher must aware on way how is going to introduce a new vocabulary or adverbs or phrase and verbs. Yes, this is my opinion.
Thank you, Sarah. So what you answer actually this question, how do you think his words position his students?
Yes.
So when we talk about his words, you mentioned his questions. So his question position his students as people who needed to know new words. And that was the end of his reading exercise. That students, learners who didn't know some vocabulary and who had to learn new words. So, and students, with some of the students' questions, position the teacher as the person who knew the answer of the definition of those new words, and that was the like all the exercises or the exchange or the interaction that they had.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Teacher, according with the last question, I worked as an English teacher at home, and among my students are 3 teenagers from 13 to 15 years old. And I think if I teach as the teacher from the video teach, I'm sure that they wouldn't return to my home anymore. So I consider that to teach children are arduous because you have to create and design didactic material. But teenagers demand other activities like read and amuse videos, advanced games or reading comprehension, and activities which are not boring for them.
Right. So what you mentioned is important because every age needs different activities, exercises, or ways to approach to what they find interesting. So teaching children, little kids, is not the same as teaching teenagers. The
Yes.
interests vary, as well as activities and the materials that we need to use to teach them.
Yes, teacher. And can I speak?
Sure, go ahead, Flor.
Yes, and I think that teacher that one problem is that the teacher of the video didn't take into account that to engage the student, and it was a terrible problem because according to the age of the students, it's very important to motivate the students to participate in class, and it's very important to contextualize the topic. And for example, if the topic is, I don't know, about the environment or about the nature or animals, if the teacher contextualize the topic and contextualize the students and motivate them, is a good is a good tool in order they want to participate or interact each other about the topic.
Okay, good, Flor. So what you mentioned is also important and is related to the construction of that teacher's identity, because based on the information that we have about what teachers usually have to do to engage students, we can we can't judge that, or we can say that this teacher lacked that information or didn't use it. And it's a way, I mean, the information that we have and the experiences that we have had help to construct identities. Identities are not stable. They are not. They are always active, and they are constructed socially. So you can have uh, you can judge that teacher in a way, and a different classmate can judge the same person in a different way. So that's why it's socially constructed, and it's based also on our previous experiences.
Teacher, I think, excuse me, good
Yes,
night,
go ahead.
everybody.
Hello.
I think the most important thing that I saw in the video was that besides the dynamic of the class, the teacher um, don't do don't don't pay attention to the faces of their students. I mean, most of them have a sad face or a bored face, and he didn't do anything. And even I think he didn't know that most of the students are not engaged with the topics, and he doesn't focus on explain properly the topic. So I think the feelings of the students are very important in our classes,
They are.
because in this case the teacher is not taking advantage of any situation, or taking into account the expectation of the students. So it's just saying and blah 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 the whole class, and the students are bored.
Exactly. It's not a, I mean, teachers are not people who just stand in front of students in a face-to-face lesson and talk without uh, getting information from the students. It's not that the students are passive. That is the opposite. They need to be active participants during the lesson. Otherwise, we don't know if they are learning, or if they are, or if they
May I
have,
say
If
something?
they understand or not.
doubts. Exactly.
Can I, teacher?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I think that maybe if teacher didn't use his boy in a proper way, is because he didn't feel comfortable with the group, or maybe he didn't feel confident with his knowledge. I think that that happening when most of the teachers that were in primary school, and they have to care some groups in middle school. They don't feel comfortable. They don't feel confident with the group, and maybe that happens. Or maybe the students feel uncomfortable, and in the class they don't feel connected with the teacher or their knowledge, um, and they couldn't understand and learn anything because they don't feel in a confident way. So I think the teacher need to show confidence when with the students. Yes, in order to the students grow the academically and feel successful with the knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
May I say something,
Teacher.
teacher?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's something important I see, and I'm trying to make a connection between the book we are reading for the questionnaires and between the and also the video. And is for example, we are speaking about identities. We need to take in account that each group of people has an identity, a social identity, and has a different attributes because every group of people have also a different context. No? If I need to teach to my students a different kinds or dialects or varieties of English spoken in different parts of the world, for sure I need to know in which context are my students, which kind of group I am dealing with, no, and where what are their social identity, what are the attributes. So I need to know my group to know how I can help them to understand the field, no.
Exactly. So teaching is more than just explaining grammar, vocabulary, or taking activities to the class, because it entails that we need to know our students, as you mentioned, Noemi, know our students good, know what they like, and also know how they behave, the interactions they have in the classroom, and the relationship they have among them. All of that is also part of teaching because that also affects their learning if they learn or if they don't. I'm going to read something that Rafael wrote here. It says the teacher did the talking, most of the talking, instead of provoking students' motivation and increase their participation. Also, there were problems to engage students properly. So most of you are creating that identity of that teacher as a person who lacks information or doesn't use information about how to engage students in an English class.
Teacher, another point is that he was teaching at the same way that he learned, probably.
Maybe.
Yes. Or other option is the teacher never had taught to teenager before. For that reason, his class was boring. Or maybe he doesn't seem to have an update lesson plan. It's another option.
Maybe he didn't plan the lesson, yeah. All,
Yeah.
but there are a lot of options there. Here in the readings that you had last week, mentioned that there were identities that also can be analyzed in small contexts or big contexts. So we can have identities identities of people who belong to the same country. We can also analyze identities of people that participate in a classroom, or as in this example, just the teacher's identity. So, and also the same person can have different identities depending on the role they play in different contexts. So the teacher can construct or constructs an identity in his family, as a friend, also as a teacher, and in his teacher context, in his workplace, the teacher can construct an identity as a researcher or as an educator or as a teacher educator. So identities are multiple, are um, are changing all the time, are built in the society, are socially constructed. Okay, so before we move to the other topic, what you read for last week, I would like to know if you have any comment about identities or any question. Okay, if there are no questions, we will move to the reading that you had last week, which is about language, dialects, and varieties. So we will start with this question that you see on the screen. So, what linguistic elements of a language are usually compared when trying to identify varieties? So, to try to remember this information, I would like you to think about how we characterize or differentiate the regional varieties that we have in Colombia. So, for example, people from the coast, people from Antioquia, and people from El Llano. So, what aspects do we use to compare the way people speak in those regions? What linguistic aspects?
Teacher, excuse me, can you repeat the question? What linguistic aspects do we use to what? To compare?
Yes, to compare regional varieties.
Are you speaking about intonation?
Okay, so pronunciation, intonation, and accent is one of them. Yes, so we can say that people from the coast have a different accent than people from El Llano, and or the intonation from people that live in Antioquia is different from the intonation that people from the coast have. Okay, what other linguistic element do we use to compare the varieties that we have? Well, dialect is a different word. We will see why.
Teacher, the synonyms that we use to refer to some object?
So the words, yes, we use different words, sometimes in different regions.
For saying something in Bogota, you said bolsa plástica, but here in Cali, you said chuspa.
Exactly. So the lexical varieties are used when we compare regions. And which other? So we have vocabulary, we have a accent or intonation or pronunciation. Okay, Giancarlo also mentions that vowel or consonant reduction. So everything related to the way people speak, the way is related to accent. So the pronunciation, consonant or vowel reduction, or intonation. Register and style is not only analyzed for regions, but is also something that can be changed, that any person can change. So independent from the place where they are, no matter of the region, a person can use a different register. So to use formal or informal words, a different style to use formal or informal words, or a different register to use words that are specific for a certain occupation or a certain context. So register and style are varieties that are present in any person, but linguistic elements that are present in regional varieties are accent, vocabulary, and sometimes grammar and syntax. Yes, some of you already mentioned some examples of vocabulary variation and accent variation. right? So we know that intonation and pronunciation is different in some regions in Colombia.
Teacher,
That
can you give us an
Those
example
are
of?
the
sure,
teachers.
please tell any example that you have, Sebastian.
No, I was I was asking you to give us an example because
Okay,
I've been thinking for that, but I can come up with one.
Well,
okay.
for example, in grammar, they in La Costa they don't pronounce the S. I think this is one example of.
But I think that, I mean, that's not grammar. That is part of the accent.
Uh-huh.
When talk about grammar, we're talking about the conjugation of the verbs or the word order, things
Uh-huh.
like that. I don't know what
Yes.
specific
So
example do we have.
an example of grammar and syntax in the reading, you had the uh, the studies that English in the south of USA have had. So there are some studies about African English or Black English, and
Yeah.
the other one is Standard English. So
Mm,
the reading tells that although Black people in USA have sometimes a different structure, it doesn't mean that it is not a good language. That it has a structure, it has some rules, uh, it is formalized, and it is used for that group of people because they have a different identity. So it's a way, these varieties is a way to make yourself different from the rest of people from the country or from even the same region. Uh, Other example regarding syntax and grammar is the use of have, got, and have. So we teach that have is more used in American English and have got in British English. And the structure of the construction of sentences varies if we use one or the other. So that could be an example of syntax and grammar in
teacher,
relation
I have
to
a
English.
question.
Liliana.
I mean, you told us that the linguistic elements are accent, vocabulary, intonation, and pronunciation. Is that correct? Or no?
No, there are, I mean, accent. Let's go back to that. Accent includes intonation, pronunciation, reduction of vowels and consonants.
Okay.
Giancarlo has an example here. So, in the coast, we can sometimes listen to the question, ¿Dónde tú estás? Instead of ¿Dónde estás? Right.
Teachers, can I compare the accent and vocabulary and grammar with another country, maybe with Argentina or maybe with Spain?
Sure. We
Yeah.
will see some examples of that. But before Noemi wrote that in Santander there is also a variation of a grammar. For example, in the sentence mucho gusta hermano instead of eso gusta mucho. So that's also an example of exchange of the order of words that is related to variations in the grammar. Liliana, you asked about variations of vocabulary in different uh, countries that speak Spanish. So here on this slide we have an example. In Spain, the word for apartamento is piso. In Argentina is departamento. In Mexico, apartamento. And in Puerto Rico, apartamento. And there we have other examples of other words. So va- varieties in lexical varieties can also be studied in countries that speak the same language, but also in one country in the different regions, and even in the same regions we can have varieties in small communities. So, for example, in Bogota, you know that our country has social classes. So in Bogota or in any big country, in any big city, sorry, in Colombia, we can identify social varieties and lexical varieties that are related to the place where people live, to the social classes that we have in the country. So in Bogota, we can listen to different words to refer to the same object depending on the person who says the word. If it's a person who uh, belongs to the high social class or the low social class or the medium social class. So that also happens in small communities, in small groups of people, in regions of a country or in countries where the same language is spoken. Wilton wrote ¿Dónde anda? Instead of ¿Dónde está? Uh-huh.
A teacher, for instance, in Argentina, they refers to espero. The same word is for virome.
Exactly.
I mean, virome espero, and if I talk with someone who live there, I don't understand. And in Puerto Rico, I know that the word bicho is a bad word for them.
For example, so words that are root for in some countries are not in others. So if we listen to root words from El Salvador, we are not going to feel attacked or we are not going to feel angry because those words don't mean anything for us.
Yeah.
Sebastián wrote ¿Dónde fuiste? Versus ¿Dónde fuiste? Exactly.
Teacher, also redundance is important in this part, don't you?
Could you repeat, Sharon, please?
Redundant.
Uh-huh. So,
Because for saying an example, here in Cali we said mira ve
okay.
instead of look at.
Okay, so those are expressions, and in our country, we can identify different expressions in each region. Paisa people would say Ave Maria Ome, and the people from the coast they also have different expressions. Right. So let's go back to the linguistic aspects. Giancarlo wrote, in Central America, the verb venir is taken as a sexual reference. ¿A qué horas vienes? Is not a good idea or is not a good question to ask in Central America. Okay, that's also important because sometimes people, when learning a language, they usually translate every word, and if they don't realize that words mean different things, they can be rude or they can be impolite. Good. So linguistic aspects of language variations are the three ones that you see, and we mentioned that those linguistic variations can happen in any language. For example, in English, we can help students identify differences between British and American English in relation to vocabulary, as the words that you see there, nappy, diaper, holiday vacation, sweets, candy, lorry truck, timetable schedule, cooker, stove, chips, french fries, rubber, eraser, flat apartment. But also linguistic variation can happen in the same country. So on the south of USA, people say soda or pop, and on the north of USA, they say Coke, and it's the same, right? So it can also happen in the same country. Accent varieties, for example, in this map, we can see how accents have been or are identified in these regions, the varieties of accents, but also we can study the differences of accent in countries where the same language is spoken. So American accent, British accent, Australian accent, Canadian, Indian, Jamaican, New Zealander, or South African English accent. Syntax and grammar that we already mentioned. Noemi wrote, also, I can't teach literally to a student the sentence. No me saque la piedra. Exactly. So those expressions sometimes have translations that are similar and other times they are not. So it is also important to teach students those differences. Okay, now the reading that you had last week also talked about dialect. What do you remember about that concept? What is the definition of a dialect according to the reading?
Teacher, what I remember is that dialect is a kind of language that people use based on their traditional behaviors, and they use it in a specific way in their community, and also is related with context.
Right, very good. Any other idea?
I think that the dialect vary according to the geography's place, zone, or no.
Yes,
Yeah.
we can have regional dialects.
It's used, sorry.
Go ahead, Sarah.
It's easy to refer to a particular way of speaking or language associated with a particular region or social group. For example, this term help us to denote a geographical distinct variety of language. I remember that in the readings, it talked about patois, which is a term of French. It was on a dialect and is considered not common to use in description of language, but speakers of English there. I didn't remember this note.
Okay, Mayra wrote regional and social dialects varies according to the experience. All right, what the reading says is that the word dialect is used to denote a language that has less status than the standardized one. So it's a pejorative word that is used to refer to a variety. So in social linguistics or social linguists prefer to say variety to mean that there is a difference in the same language. Here we have speakers. The word dialect is understood by speakers as local varieties. For example, the English that is spoken in one part of Great Britain, that is Yorkshire, or informal or lower class or rural speech. So again, dialect is a word that is used in a pejorative way to say that there is a variety of a language in the same country.
Teacher, excuse me, about this, I remember that in our last class we mentioned that about different language and dialect. Language, for example, we can say that is English, a general English. But according to the region, for example, we can get a different dialect that like English, American English, British English, Australian English, Canadian English. That is the different, but there is only one language that is general English.
Exactly. But what has happened is that for sociopolitical reasons, we agree or accept that the language spoken in a certain part of a country is the one that is good, or is the one that should be taught, or is the one that is in the books. It doesn't mean that the varieties of the regions are are uh, are wrong or should not be spoken. According to the reading, is because of socio-political reasons that some people say or believe that the language that is spoken in one part of that country is the best. But there is no a linguistic difference or something objective, an objective justification that can support that idea. So that's why that is related to the word dialect, because that is a word that is used in a pejorative way to mean that a variety is the wrong way to use that language. It's related to informal, lower class, rural speech. Let's see. Noemi wrote, even the different varieties, the standard English is the same. So yes, we have the same language, but we have varieties that sometimes are called dialects. For example, in this map, you can see that dialects or the varieties were classified, and they have a lot in Great Britain. So
One thing,
yes,
yes, one thing that I wanted to mention about this thing of dialects and varieties is the fact that they mentioned in the reading that there is not such a thing as a standard language by nature. The concept of standard is something that, as you said, has to do with social and political power, and has nothing to do with linguistic. There's with a certain linguistic rationale in order to say, well, this language is standard. It's just a social agreement. So the standard language as we know it is as to say like the dialect of variety that is accepted, but doesn't necessarily mean that the other types of English, for example, are not accepted. Like Latino English and Afro American English. So that's something good, and I consider it was very interesting and enlightening to me.
exactly. Thank you, Giancarlo. So what you mentioned is related to ideologies. So we have some ideologies related to standard languages. So we have the ideology that these some rules or some ways, on some accents or some words are the ones that should be used. But is, as you mentioned, is something that is accepted by a group of people, but there is nothing. There is not a rationale that supports that idea. Joanna wrote, "It is the way of speaking that is characteristic of a certain geographical area or certain group of people," referring to dialect. Okay, here we have that the understanding of dialect for sociolinguistics is a variety. So for sociolinguistics, the standard variety is also a variety of a language, and there is an increasing trend toward discussing discrete language as ideologically constructed rather than linguistically real entities. Usually, speakers have sociopolitical ideologies and different social identifications, which infer in the identification of a language as a dialect. And there is considerable variety in everyday use, but somewhere in the background there is an ideal that can be appealed to proper use of the language. This ideal is based on sociopolitical ideology of the language and on different social identifications of the speakers. So again, if we want varieties exist because people also want to uh, identify themselves as different from the rest of a country. Here we have other question. What is social identity?
The social identity, I think, is the way we get involved in a particular context, and also is related with the way we spoke, or the speech
We
we
speak,
are.
exactly. Sharon, you can say that you are a Caleña because you speak in a way that identifies you as a person who belongs to that region,
Yeah,
right? And no matter if you people from other regions in Colombia, I mean people from most of the regions in Colombia, they even if they come to Bogota and live for a
yeah,
long time here, they keep their
their
speech, their
intonation.
variety, because that helps them to feel as part of a region where they feel they belong to.
Yeah, that happens to me because I was living there for 9 years, and till the last day I was talking in this way with my particular intonation and using all my colloquial words.
Yes, and some other people in Colombia who have also very strong social identity are people from the coast because
Yeah,
they don't even have different way to speak, but also they don't adapt to the rules in Bogota in relation to interaction. So, for example, they are very happy people, so they love gathering, and so most of them love to party, and wherever they go, they behave that way because that's part of their of being from the
of the
coast.
life.
So
or
they don't adapt.
another example is the, for saying something, the paisa intonation,
Right.
because
That
my sister's husband have been living in Canada for more than 20 years, and when you talk to him, he is always with that same intonation, even if he hasn't talked with anybody of his family from here. So a very remarked issue with the people.
right.
Excuse me, teacher. I have a little opinion about that because I was reading another information about that, and I read that the social identity is not only related to the region of the person we're from, maybe we can identify ourselves according to our religion or according to
Exactly.
our political affiliation or the relationship between our relatives.
Our profession.
Yes, our profession, right, teacher?
Okay, that is related to, here we have it, social dialects more than social identities. So when we talk about social dialects, we can say that in Bogota, people who belong to the same religion can have different ways to speak. Or people who belong to different ethnies, who are Afro or who are indigenous people, they have different ways to interact or to communicate, or a different a variety. Or people who belong to different um, social classes, they also have a different variety. So the social dialect is also related to social identities, because if you identify as a person who belongs to that group, you are going to use a different way to speak.
Teacher, we can say that it's very similar to, like in Spanish, to say jerga.
Yes, yes, you're
Okay,
right. Uh-huh.
thank
Okay, in the book, or let me read what some of you wrote here. It says, Sandra Joanna wrote, "It is the way of speaking that is characteristic of a certain geographical area or certain group of people." So she's talking about dialect. Sandra wrote, presents certain variants in terms of intonation and words with respect to the original language. So it's also dialect. Uh, Wilton wrote, social identity relates to how we identify ourselves in relation to others according to what we have in common. For example, we can identify ourselves according to religion or where we are from. Okay, so we already mentioned that religion, ethnicities, or social classes are related to social dialects. But here in the book, we have an example about uh, Chinese Cantonese and Chinese Mandarin. So, China is very big. So, in the image, you see that the same sentence, which is "I am Norwegian," in the way of writing it is kind of similar. So this symbol is similar to this one here. The second symbol is not similar, but the third, the fourth, and the fifth are similar. So they write it in a similar way, but the way to say it is different. This is the way to say Negio 5, high 6, no, whale, han. And here we have wo, she, no, whale, rain. So it's totally different. Although these people uh, speak in a different way, and that is not understandable from each other, they say they speak the same language. And the reason why they say it is because they see the people that live in the country as one, as a unity. So they don't want to be identified as people who belong to other country with other cultures or with less power, but as a unity where everybody speaks Chinese, although there are serious differences between the varieties.
Teacher, for social identity, maybe example could be the vocabulary or thing that use suso.
Yes, remember that we can, that vocabulary, lexical, grammar, structure, vocabulary, and accent are part
Yeah.
of regional varieties. And you can say that you belong to a certain society or to a certain region because you want to identify with them,
Okay.
even if we have, as this example, uh, serious differences that we would say that these two ways of speaking are different languages, but they say they are not. They say they speak the same Chinese, although the way they pronounce it is totally different.
Mm.
Teacher, hearing me. Maybe an example, I don't know if it's good or no. I can say that in that case, in a social identity, I say that maybe Colombian people are more conservative than the Brazilian people. Maybe that is a good example, or I'm wrong.
That well, that's related to identity and is
Yes.
related to behavior,
Mm,
right? So now this idea of social linguistics is more related to what is observed in the way we speak that make us or help us to identify as being from one or belong to a society or a region or to have the same language.
okay, thank you.
Okay, here we have the role of social identity. So it says social linguistics claim that the defining factor in determining whether two varieties are considered distinct languages or dialects of the same language is a socio-political identity, not linguistic similarity or difference. So again, this difference is not objective. Is something that people agree about. To say that if they speak a different dialect or a different language. Okay, Mayra wrote the fact that you can be in the same region having different social identities was highlighted in the text. Okay, it can also happen. You can live in Antioquia, but there are different groups of people that identify uh, because they speak with a variety belonging to the same region. It can happen.
Yes, teacher. Also, in the readings, we found that was another example, and was the Hindi language and the Urdu. And they explained that they both speak the same language, but they both write it totally different in with different characters, all the letters. But even that, it's the same language.
Exactly. So they want just to identify as different, although they do speak the same language with the same words, but they don't want to identify themselves as being from from the same region. So they say they have different dialects. Good. Then we have this question: what are good examples of power and solidarity in the context of social linguistics? What can be an example of power and solidarity in the context of social linguistics?
Uh, but so I need to say that the power, as I found, is the ability to control events and the ability to choose the identity we want to show, and with who we want to have a group. Is the ability to go in between a group and be part of it, as I understand.
Exactly.
Well,
So,
well, teacher, I can say that maybe about the power. Good example is the labor that some social leaders are doing in this moment for some special regions in Colombia. And unfortunately, some of them are killed. That the others are working in a very good way in order to help the special people. So I don't know if I am wrong, but I think that is a good example of that.
but that is more related to how to defend ideas.
Yes,
That
Okay, yes.
about linguistics, so we need to take into account the language, no? If it's the same language, because for example in Colombia we have also ethnic languages, so you need to have the capacity to understand them, and also the cultural behavior and all the cultural things they believe, all the all his culture and his languages, I think.
uh-huh. So we have different indigenous groups in Colombia. If people who belong to those groups do not defend their language and start using the variety that is Spanish from any region of Colombia, they start their language their language
Die.
is going to die, is going to disappear. So if they don't have solidarity among themselves to keep their language alive, that the language will die. And on the opposite, power is what the language, the standard language that is a consensus of for people to identify it as a standard is the one that has the power because it's the one that is taught in in every place where somebody wants to learn, for example, Spanish. Or if somebody wants to learn English, they were mainly going to find out books with the variety of British or American English. They are not going to find out the variety of Jamaican English or Indian English, but the ones that have the power, which are British or American. This is what we have in the book. It says part of having power is having the ability to impose your way of speaking on others as a prestigious dialect that is a standard language. The process through which a standard language arises is primarily a sociopolitical process rather than a linguistic one. And here we have ideology involving the recognition of a standard. So people tend to think of a language as a legitimate and fixed system, which can be objectively described, and regard dialects as deviations from this norm. This is the standard language ideology. So if we consider that the English spoken in London is the one that is rule that has rules that is systematic, that can be that is recognized in any part of the world. So we are helping to, or we are constructing an ideology of that variety of English as the standard. And the ones that are spoken in other parts of that country will be the dialects. Here we have other question. What does the process of the standardization of a language involve?
the standardization is the
Teacher.
process. Oh, okay, go.
Okay, I'm Wilton. Um, Teacher, I think there are different ways to standardization of the language because maybe we can use the dictionary and we can use books like the Bible, and we can maybe the education when we are teaching. Of course, we are doing something like standardization because we use the the adequate or the best option to speak or to teach to another people. Could be there is another option, and we use things like that to the standardization of the language. And of
Okay.
course, I think there are other things that maybe in this moment I forget it, but is I think it's the dictionary because maybe there are a group of people who is writing new words and they are um, doing that process to standardization. If we, for example, we read the Bible, we maybe we can take in account the the all the all way to say many things that in this moment or nowadays we don't use anymore.
Right. Okay, so mainly what is written and what is sold as an example of Spanish, let's say, or what is taught in different places as Spanish uh, will be will help to standardize the language. So you won't see like academic books with many varieties of Spanish in Colombia, like vocabulary from different regions or changes in syntax, as we mentioned before. But we will see mainly what was agreed upon as the standard, which is the reason why people say that uh, the Spanish way of or the way of speaking in Bogota is the standard, because that is what we find in the books. No matter who writes it, if it's a person from Medellin, if it's a person from Cali, if it's a person from the coast or from Llanos or from any region, what you will mainly find in the books is the words that are not from the regions.
The words are standard.
That because it was something that we agreed upon, or because it is the part of the standardization process, to put everything in a written way and to teach what is in the book. That's for example, the English that we learn in the universities is a standard English. It's an English from the books. We don't learn the varieties unless we travel and we interact with native people. So we will learn, or unless you are curious and you watch movies or look for information in the web and you get new vocabulary and new varieties from those sources. But mainly what we find in the books are not examples of varieties, but a standard English. We can see that we have in the books, even we have in the books English spoken in English, American English or British English. So that's the way we find the books divided uh, for people who want to learn in Colombia. So we can have those two varieties. So here we have some sentences about the standardization process. It says involves grammar, spelling books, dictionaries, on literature. It requires an agreement about what needs to be considered as a standard. It is connected to education, so that the standard variety is the one that is that is accepted. It takes on ideological dimensions, social, cultural, and sometimes political, beyond the purely linguistic ones. And the idea of standardizing a language is to eliminate diversity and variety, but that is not possible. We mentioned before that people who belong to different regions here or in any other country, they defend their variety. They keep it because that makes them feel part of that land, that space, that group of people. So they keep it. And well, finally, before we finish, we already mentioned social dialects, which is related to the ethnias, but also to religion and to social classes. So we've mentioned that regional dialects originate from or in the regions, and social dialects originate in the smaller communities as religious communities, ethnias, or social classes. So we can see that social linguistics can study language in big contexts as countries, or smaller ones as cities, regions, or small communities in cities, or the small context of a class. Any comment about this? Any question before we finish?
No, teacher.
No, teacher.
Okay. Good. So I'm going to stop the encounter so we can have a short break for those who have the other encounter of teacher practicum. So we will have like 10 minutes. A 10 minutes
teacher.
break before we start the other.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all. If you have any questions, email me about the readings that you are doing this week.
Okay, teacher.
Otherwise, we will meet next week, okay? For these topics.
Thank you, teacher.
Thank you all.
Okay, thanks.
See you next week.